For today's screencast, we are looking at pages 86 to 89 of our current reading. You're to start where it says the Supreme Court at work. 9 judges decide the cases of the United States Supreme Court. Supreme Court judges are called justices. The head of the Supreme Court is called the Chief Justice. Supreme Court justices meet from October through June. During that time, around 4,500 cases are appealed to the Supreme Court. However, the justices have time to hear only about 200 of them. They try to choose the most important cases that require decisions based on the Constitution. Supreme Court justices study each case and then vote on a decision. A majority vote is needed for a decision. The justices publish written opinions about the case that explain why the decision was made. These decisions establish precedents for judging future court cases. Justices make 4 different kinds of decisions on cases that are brought to the Supreme Court. First, justices decide whether the laws of Congress are constitutional. Second, the Supreme Court can decide if state laws are constitutional. Third, the court can decide if a president's actions, such as Nixon's actions about Watergate, are constitutional. Fourth, the court can decide on how to settle problems between 2 states. For example, in 1962, the Supreme Court decided that it was unconstitutional to require students to say certain prayers in public schools. This decision was based on the separation of church and state described in the First Amendment. The 1962 Supreme Court decision explained how to apply the First Amendment in the nation's public schools. The importance of judicial review. Judicial review is one of the Supreme Court's most important powers. Judicial review allows the Supreme Court to overturn any law that it decides is unconstitutional. The Supreme Court can overturn acts of the executive branch, like federal and state laws. Since 1803, the Supreme Court has overturned more than 100 federal laws and more than 1,000 state laws. The power of judicial review allows the Supreme Court to interpret the Constitution in new ways in order to meet the needs of a changing nation. It also allows the Supreme Court to reverse previous Supreme Court decisions. Decisions made by judicial review sometimes affect history. For example, 2 major cases, Plessy v. Ferguson and Brown v. the Topeka Board of Education, affected the civil rights and freedom of millions of African Americans. Both cases were interpretations of the same clause in the 14th Amendment. This clause says that states cannot deny people the equal protection of the laws. How did judicial review of these 2 cases force many states to change their laws? In the 1896 case called Plessy v. Ferguson, the Supreme Court used the 14th Amendment to allow segregation. A segregation law in Louisiana separated African American people and white people in trains. In 1896, the Supreme Court ruled that this law was constitutional if the separate places for African Americans were of equal quality to the places for whites. After that, many states used the decision to pass segregation laws. However, no one enforced the laws to make sure the places were equal. They were often not. In 1954, in a case called Brown v. Topeka Board of Education, the Supreme Court reversed the 1896 decision. It used judicial review to overturn segregation law. The 1954 decision said separate schools for African Americans and whites could never be equal. And the 14th Amendment makes all segregation laws unconstitutional. Based on that decision, many desegregation laws were passed. States no longer have separate schools, trains, and restaurants for different people. The judicial branch and democracy. The framers of the Constitution planned the judicial branch as part of the separation of powers. The judicial branch can prevent the abuse of power by Congress and the executive branch by declaring their laws and actions unconstitutional. The Constitution protects our freedom by giving every American the right to due process. Americans who do not receive due process in trials in lower courts can appeal to higher courts and even to the Supreme Court. So now that you've finished this reading, you're going to go back to today's lesson and complete the chapter check. Make sure to use this reading to help you find your answers. If you need me, please don't hesitate to call or email. Good luck.